Boop. And you should all be getting a message that we're starting our journey and it's being recorded. Is that true? Okay, terrific. Okay, so yeah, once again, welcome. It seems like there's been a lot of churn in the creative sector lately. So I always like to start my presentations by providing an overview of the Maine Arts Commission, which might be something that a lot of you have heard, but maybe some of you haven't. And it's just always helps to clarify. The Maine Arts Commission is part of the state of Maine government. The commission currently has 7 people on our team, that includes myself. We're part of the Maine State Cultural Council, which was established in 1989, which was the Maine Arts Commission, Historic Preservation Commission, the library, and the Maine State Museum. And then it's been expanded over time to also include the archives, the Maine Humanities Council, and the Maine Historical Society. And so we're kind of this cultural cluster that is part of the Maine state government that's working for you. And it's kind of this cluster of organizations that try to speak in a unified voice to the state on cultural matters. And each of these own organizations has its own kind of practices and policies. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the Maine Arts Commission's focus, especially around grants, funding to arts entities in Maine. The way we think about the way we engage arts entities has not changed, even though our grants have really pretty much significantly changed in like the last 14 months because of some restructuring we've done. But we still kind of think about grants internally as grants that are going to individuals and grants that are going towards organizations. And that's really kind of been true. The one little shift that I'll get into a little later on is the idea of arts education and arts learning and where schools fit into this. They were kind of I don't want to say they were a square peg, but they were differentiated from the organizational support that we traditionally were doing. And now they've kind of come back into that sort of organizational support. So our organization grants go to nonprofit organizations, but they also include schools and then municipal entities and tribal governments and things like that. 2 of the biggest things that we were able to become clearer about with the restructuring of the grants is that we are clearer now that we don't accept, fiscal sponsors are not eligible to apply on behalf of a non-501c3. We were kind of wishy-washy about that in the past, trying to make accommodations, and it got really complicated. So we're not doing that anymore. But to kind of make up for it, or we rethought how we are funding individuals. So if individuals are part of a non-profit or are part of an artist collective, we'd really like to see applications from them. So that kind of helps these smaller organizations and these starting out organizations with getting funding from us in a way that doesn't put them in a competitive competition with these larger organizations that might be more established and have better kind of 501c3 structures. So hopefully you can see this is pretty amazing to me when I did this slide, which is kind of showing the faded slide underneath is everything we were doing last year, and then everything that we're doing this year, which seems like it's been reduced a lot. And I don't think it's been reduced at all, but it's been clarified a lot, which we feel pretty good about. Basically, the highlights of this are that the Creative Aging Grant is kind of the last grant that's being kind of absorbed and accommodated into different organization grants. So this is going to be the last cycle for our Creative Aging Grant. It's going to be kind of part of the Organization Projects Grant in the next cycle. So if you do have projects that are going to be engaging older adults, you can get funding through the Organization Project Grant, but there's not going to be a distinct offering. Likewise, our apprenticeships are both being managed now with other partners. The Maine Craft Association has always been a partner with us for the craft apprenticeship, and they use our grants management system to help the applications. Cultural Resources Incorporated is now doing the traditional arts apprenticeship, and they're going to be not using our grants management system, but doing the application through their own organization in partnership with us to support traditional arts apprenticeships. Arts and Humanities Grant that used to be for organizations that we administered, the Humanities Council is administering it for the next 2 years. We have a relationship with them, so we kind of go back and forth and share that responsibility. And so they're the ones you'd be going to. Jane Morrison, the Maine Media Workshops and Colleges, is managing this grant now. Arts Learning, Dance Education, and Creative Communities Planning, all getting absorbed into our organizational projects or organizational operations grant. So those, again, streamlining it and trying to make it just more intuitive for our users to access the funding. The Seed 2 grant, which was the communities, Creative Communities Implementation Grant, that was this really big dollar grant. Some of you might remember. We put it on pause last year. We're discontinuing it this year. The reason for that is primarily because we want to do fully funding for the awards we give out, and that high dollar grant wasn't making that really easy to do. So we figured that giving full funding to the people who are getting our awards instead of partial funding was more important than that other initiative. And I'm happy to talk with you more about it if you really found that the Seed 2 is valuable. We're still looking for ways to get more money to try to figure out how to do ambitious projects with lots of money, but that requires like lots of money and a lot of good ideas. So, but that's changed as well. So really, we're down to, and then of course, why you're here today is that the organization partnership and the organization development have kind of been combined into the organization operations grant, and that's thanks for bearing with me for that background. And so here we are with what we're doing. And I've sort of, this is it. This is what we're offering now. We have the Artist Springboard Grant, which is for artists. This is structured sort of as greater kind of complexity to the application in some ways, where the Artist Springboard Grant is our introduction grant. It's for people who have not been funded by us before. We're really looking at emerging artists. We're looking at people who might be underserved, as artists who might have difficulty with the application process. This is a good ground for helping people figure out how to write grants, how to work with funders, and it's a great kind of entry level offering. The Artist Project Grant is for doing high quality creative projects by individuals. Both of these, like I mentioned before, someone who's with a nonprofit could apply for if their project is involved with a lot of people. So that's really nice. The organization project is pretty much the standard organization project as it always was, across discipline, across scale. If you've got a project that needs funding, that's an arts project, that's where you go. We're being a little bit more clear this time around that the organization project support is for any 501c3 in Maine with an arts project. So we still expect that a majority of our applicants are going to be arts organizations, but we really want to be more inclusive about other organizations that have good ideas that would be impactfully successful in the creative sector. And then the differentiation is that the organization operations grant is focused on arts organization support. So it's operational support for arts organizations that are 501c3s, and that's kind of the biggest dollar grant that we're offering right now. It's $7,500. The two other offerings, I mentioned apprenticeships a little bit before. Those aren't grants per se. It's sort of a professional development. It's a whole kind of other thing, as well as the fellowships, which are merit-based awards. And I'm not going to go into those right now, so I can talk a little bit more about the organization operations grant. One thing that we have set up with the organization operations funding is to sort of think about what you're applying for in terms of, we use the language project, and it's kind of confusing to people because we use it for sort of anything that our funds get applied to. We consider that a project. So if it's organizational operations, it's an operational project. If it's a project, it's a project. But but we sort of use those two things synonymously as far as how we think about where our funds go. They go to a project, and in that we really want to know how our funds are being spent. So it's useful to be prepared when you're asking for operational support from us in this new grant, to be able to identify kind of even generally where the funding is going to go. It's not just going to go into some big operational account and get used for whatever you need. But if you say this is probably going to get used for salary support, or this is probably going to get used for a marketing campaign we're going to be doing in the middle of our season, or we need to hire some contractors for special work. Just kind of be aware that we'd really like to know that information in the application. Even though it's general operating support, being just a little bit specific helps us know how the field is using the money, what the needs are out there, and it'll strengthen your application to the reviewers and just being able to think about it. But for those of you who are familiar with the partnership grants and how they sort of have evolved from 2 years ago to last year to this one, if you've checked out the website, you'll see that the questions have been simplified with this organization operations grant. We're basically just asking 3 things now. We want a mission and description of your organization. We want to know about your programming, and then we want to know how you're impacting your community. And those are really the questions we're asking. It really gets to the heart of things, and I think it's going to give our reviewers what they need to really clearly see what you're doing. Likewise, we have made a better alignment of our review criteria. There's essentially the excellence and artistic merit of your project, the funds are going to get used in a strategic way, and that there's going to be community benefit. And that, again, that's that kind of this aligns right with those 3 questions, 3 review criteria. We've got 1 extra criteria that's kind of the overall application quality, but really, we think that's going to make things a lot more pleasant as an applicant versus what was there maybe 3 years ago. We've really tried to make this as frictionless as we can. And then to work on that as well, there's fewer uploads. If you've applied to the partnership grant a while back, we were asking for a lot of materials, and it was very informative for the reviewers, but it also really created some friction in an efficient review. So we're asking for kind of the standard things like a IRS designation letter, the 990 tax form, but we're a lot more open to kind of any strategic plan or business plan that you had. I think for the partnerships a while ago, we required an audit in that. That's no longer required. We were requiring participation in the data arts program. We're no longer doing that. It really has been simplified. The only other thing that we've sort of added as well is an inclusion survey, which is not going to be, it's going to inform the reviewers' outlook on your organization, but it isn't a weighted criteria. So it's a discussion point. It's really good to be able to answer those questions openly and honestly. We're doing a lot of diversity, equity, and inclusion work at our office. We know folks out in the sector are doing a lot of that work as well, and we want to know kind of what the practices are and where we are in the landscape of things. So we're doing this work. We know you're doing that work. We want it to count. For folks doing good work, we want it to be the reviewers to know that, so your applications are favorably scored. This is the basic timeline of our grants. And as you can see, the big takeaway from this is noticing how there's an earlier deadline for the organization operations grants than there is for our other offerings. And the reason we have done that is because if you are applying for an organization operations grant and you get declined, you will be notified before the deadline of the organization projects grant. So you'll get another chance. If you want another chance, you can have another chance. And it will help us support our organizations in a more kind of in a better way. We used to cluster these together, so teasing them out a little bit has been really useful, we think, and has allowed for folks to get the kind of support that they need in a better way. All of our notices are predicated on getting approval from the Arts Commission board, and that's we try to align it so there's not a lot of time between the end of the deadline, the review cycle, and then getting that information to you. So that's a good takeaway, I guess, if you're strategically thinking about how you're going to be applying for things, that as an organization you could do 2 applications if you need to, but if you don't have to write 2, because you've got your funding for the first one and you can go on to other organizations that you're seeking support from. Other good updates that are probably worth knowing about include the help pages that we've developed over the past cycle, informed by a lot of the questions that you've had to us that we hope we can answer in a really elegant way. For those of you that don't know about our help page section, it's on the Maine drop down. for our funding. It's like apply now, overview, past grants. At the bottom, it's like help page, and it's got a bunch of documents that kind of will help work you through it if you have questions about the process. It's based on 4 sections: preparing your application, so kind of thinking about it beforehand and getting your account ready and getting your vendor code, maybe things like that. And then of course, completing the application and navigating our grant portal. Then award management help, if you know, ask questions about what the final report's going to be about, things like that. And then of course, a nice long chunky list of forms that you may or may not need with us. Most of those you probably don't need. You'll be given, if you are an awardee, you'll be sent a letter of agreement that you return to us, and that's it until the final report. But if you need to do a grant modification along the way, if something, I don't know, comes along where your whole organization gets upended, like say with the pandemic, and you need to make some changes, you can use these forms, and we have the processes to help you kind of navigate that and still use the funding in a way that will be useful to you even when disruptions happen. And so anyway, a lot of forms. And then we also have a new page called definitions, because we found that, you know, our language does not always align with your language, or our understanding of our language doesn't always. Things like talking about projects being not necessarily projects. So we've got a page where we talk about in detail about matching funds and what we really mean by benefit to the community, and really trying to help folks know what we're thinking about when we use terms that could have a lot of different meanings. And of course, you know, that's always great. But if you want to call us and talk to us and ask us in person, we're always available. There's a list of all the staff, including myself, with email addresses and phone numbers on our website. So if you do need clarification during the application process, either before, middle, or after, please feel free to reach out to us and ask those questions and get clarification before the deadline comes. And then kind of, I'm almost done now, which is great, because I was trying to time this out for about half an hour. And just sort of the general overview of the priorities we've been doing, which hopefully you were able to pick up on a little bit with how we've changed with the organization operations grant, which is we're really trying to have more conversations with communities. We're doing our strategic planning sessions in a number of communities. Some of you might be aware of that. So we're really trying to meet and figure out needs this cycle. That's not just for the grants, that's for sort of our organization as a whole. That's a priority. We've really been trying to simplify and clarify our information and make it more, just making it better, making a better application experience. We understand that we've got a few extra hurdles we need you to cross, because we are making reports to the National Endowment for the Arts for a lot of our funding. So what we can do to simplify our end of it, you know, we can't simplify the federal government requirements, but we can do what we can with our requirements. So we're trying to do that as best we can, and always looking for ways to refine that. More accessible support for smaller organizations. We've been doing that with the Springboard grant, but we've also, you might have noticed that there's a large and a small organization operations grant, both of which have the same award amount. I mean, I'm sure we can talk about that after the presentation, because you might have questions about that, but that was really a way we thought we could help. Smaller organizations often have really good projects and can make a lot of bang for the buck, and we think that it could be a lot more impactful than the tiering system that we were doing, where smaller organizations got less money. So we're making an experiment with that, but we think it's going to have good results. Realigning our education support. Some of you may have gotten an email from me earlier, not earlier this year, this might have been like the end of last year, talking about our Ticket to Ride program, which is our school busing program, where students at public schools can get busing support funding to support busing to arts organizations and events. And we're looking at ways maybe arts organizations could apply for that support, especially because schools are under so much strain these days. And I think arts field trips is problematic in and of itself, even without everything else going on. So really trying to figure out how we can make what we're doing now more relevant, and then also really figuring out other ways we can support arts education, because it's a really important focus for us. We really want to make sure we're effective with it. Again, more consideration to diversity, equity, and inclusion. I sort of mentioned we have that survey now, and we're really seeking to have a better kind of feedback loop with the sector on what you're doing and how we're doing things. And then seeking more external funding at the end of the day. You know, you need money to do stuff. So we, with the ARPA grants, the American Recovery Act grants, some of you may have gotten a note from us that says we're looking for additional funding for projects that we were not able to fund from that pool. So we're trying to get other state organizations involved. We're looking at county governments right now because they've got some American Recovery Act funding. So there might be some way to access funds there. We're really kind of a new kind of priority is really kind of reaching out and trying to figure out where these external funds could come to help us support the applications we get, because there are a lot of really good applications. Even if you're not, most of the declined applications for the ARPA grants, we were very proud of. We felt really awful that we couldn't address that need. And so we think that if we show these to other folks in other sectors that want to do community building, that want to do outreach and support to their communities, that they will see that this is actually a really good investment, and being able to take those forward, we're hoping we can build relationships and get into positions where we can leverage our money better and support you people better. I think that's sort of the end of the official presentation. I just want to let you know also that before we can start having our questions and conversations, that there are more webinars coming up. This is kind of a lunch and learn, but we do have some information sessions coming up that will be posted on our website in the next couple of days. We've got a grant reviewers panel talk on February 24th. So that's if you want to ask questions to people who review things kind of regularly and how they view applications. That's going to be on February 24th at 6 o'clock. Also at 6 o'clock on February 28th. If you're interested in if you're a Springboard awardee, we're going to be having kind of an informational session with folks who have already been awarded Springboard grants. So we're checking in with those applicants who this is their first grant by us, sometimes their first grant ever. And so we're doing a lot more hand holding and checking in and really trying to help them through this process so they can have grant writing in their toolbox as artists. There's going to be an information session on March 3rd at 6 o'clock for budgets and project planning. So I know our budget process within the application is sometimes confusing for folks. So if you want to discuss that with us and some other folks, that's going to be March 3rd at 6. And then there's a 6 p.m. info session on March 7th that's going to be for prospective applicants to Springboard. So if you know of individual artists who are kind of haven't quite come into the grants world yet, you can kind of nudge them towards that. Or even people who have who are affiliated with non 501c3s or artist collectives that might be interested in some of this introductory funding. I think that could be really useful for them. So those are kind of on the boil, in addition to this sort of lunch and learn thing that is really kind of a more particular conversation for people interested in the organization operations grant. So that's what I've got for the official presentation. I know it's a lot of information, and it will be available from the recording within a week of this, depending on our capacity. But I'd love to do some questions and answers. And if you have any comments or other sharing, I would love to be listening to that and working with you on that. Oh, yes, Lindsay, you look like your hand is up.
Yeah, hi, everybody. I'm Lindsay from Portland Stage. I just wanted to ask a couple clarifying questions. Both the large and the small operations grant, the max is 7,500. Is that my understanding? That okay?
That is correct.
Okay, great, thank you. And then you mentioned DEI work. I didn't see a place to upload it. Would we just upload a statement about DEI work in the document section?
It is within the application. So and there's on the help menu there. I believe there's an application template, but it's within the application. It's really just asking about if there's diversity and equity and inclusion on your board and of the people you're serving. And it's really kind of a 1 to 5, yes, kind of, no, never survey. And so, but yeah, that's, I believe that's in our help menu if you need an example of that. And if it's not, I should have it on there, and I'll have it there within the end of the week.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah. Oh, Louisa, yes.
Hi again. I have some questions about in-kind for the org operationals grant. So I'm just wondering, I feel like when I've done applications for project-based projects, that in-kind is very clear, kind of about what will be brought as a donation for that specific project. But when we're talking about kind of general org operations, what kind of things do you consider appropriate to designate as in-kind? So for example, is it appropriate to kind of talk about some of the like intellectual property and tools that we've developed over time that will be used, you know, for this general operating support for next program year? Or can we talk about, you know, materials that we have on hand that will be contributing to this, as far as, you know, in our situation, you know, maybe programmatic art supplies that help generally all, you know, our operations?
So yeah, anything, I guess it gets a little sticky at times, but anything that you can put a value on, you can, within that time frame, you can use as an in-kind. Now, if there was if like you were using materials that you actually purchased the year before, and you're like, I'm donating these materials that I bought a year before to myself this year, like that doesn't really work. So, but if there are materials that that are being donated within the application cycle, the award cycle, so that's July to June, then that would be applicable. Does that help?
And of course, volunteer time is a big one as well. If there are, you know, you can absolutely put an hourly value on the time that people are volunteering towards your operation. So that's a big one there for sure. Also, donated space is another one. If you have an event and, you know, an organization or another venue is donating their space, you can certainly put a value on that. They already have a rental rate value. That's pretty easy to do, but you can think about some other rental values within the area if that particular venue doesn't, you know, usually charge rent for something.
Thanks, Meg. Beth, hi.
Hi, I'm with Louisa. I have a question on how do we show, so in the budget categories, we have, you know, the ask for this grant, and then we have cash match and in kind. The cash match, you know, some of those buckets, we know where the funding is coming from, like we'll have X amount left from our government funds for part of the year. But there's some buckets where there's a hole, and we're trying to fill those holes with other grants. So my question is two parts. How do we show those holes? Like, here's what we're trying to get. And I guess we could just describe that in the narrative. But the other piece is, should the total at the bottom, should the grand total of the project budget equal our organizational total budget? So there's two questions. How do you show the gaps? Like, okay,
so if you've got funds that are pending but not secured, you can put those in and indicate that they're pending. I believe there's a description beneath each row, so you can say $50,000 from the NEA for the Our Town grant, or I guess it's 10,000 for the Our Town grant pending. You know, so you've got the application and you're expecting it. We can say, great, you've got some leads, you're working on it, it's not secured. Of course, if it's secured, that's even better, and you want to indicate that. Great. And then yeah, as for operational funding, we're contributing to your operation, so that should all end up pretty, you know, our grants probably a very small slice of the pie in that one section of our budget. And then the rest of the way your organization's going has the rest of those expenses kind of listed out in the right categories.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, sure. Shoni, hi.
Hey, I am wondering, our budget has kind of vacillated wildly this last few years, and we've been below 500 a couple, yeah, the last 2 years. But so which fiscal year are we basing our organizational budget on? Upcoming or previous?
I think we're working for the current one. We do
Okay.
ask for the budget of your previous completed budget income expenses, but
Mhm.
really we want to fund you here and now and not then and then. So I think whatever your projections are for your current cycle and what you're operating with now would be the most applicable.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would just recommend definitely pointing that out in your narrative, because there is a spot where even just in the forum, without going back and looking at your 990, the reviewers will see that, and it would be good to just be very clear about that in your narrative that there has been a drop,
Yeah.
and just get ahead of any questions like that. So.
I guess also, just to let you know, if you've already completed your application and want to go back based on this meeting or any other new information, just send me an email. We can unlock those and anytime before the deadline. So if you want to do a modification after the fact, we're happy to do that. So even though it's submitted, you can change things before the deadline if you need to. And that's not just for this, that's for all of our grants. If you get us before the deadline, we're happy to let you add things. Anyone else have questions or comments about this? Wow, I'm gonna just take that as I had a very thorough presentation on that and take the W on that one. Yeah, I guess, I mean, I don't want to, we had scheduled for an hour, but if we don't need to take it, I know we're all very busy. So I'm going to be here hanging out with Meg and Ryan, but if you need to get back to doing what you're doing, you should do that. We'll be here for a few more minutes. So if you do decide that you want to log back in and ask a question, please do so. But yeah, I don't want to keep you if you've got all the information you need and all of your questions answered.
And I did post a link to our staff page in the chat box, but it's also, so that staff bio page has all of our individual, direct contact information. But throughout the grants portal now, there are all of our emails and all that. It's all listed in the sidebars and everything. So it's there. We very truthfully, welcome any questions and are here to help. So feel free to reach out to any of us in any way, email, phone, whatever works for you, and we'll get back with you as soon as we can.
So yeah, like I said, we'll be here for a little while longer, but please don't let that keep you from getting back to what you were doing. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you again so much for joining us here and being part of this.